Paul. I'm the pastor of Living Stones Christian Reformed Church, and I've been doing a number of videos lately about a few different things. One of the things I wanted to do today are some thoughts that I've had after rereading a couple of C.S. Lewis books, Miracles and The Problem of Pain. I think they're wonderful books. They're fairly philosophical, but I think they're well written and very much worth your while. Lewis begins by asking the question, is the universe or the world just full of things that are, in a sense, self-sufficient and non-contingent? I know that's a philosophical word, but bear with me. That the universe is just full of all these independent things, and they just simply are as they are, what they are. Lewis would call that naturalism. Today we might call that materialism. Or, in fact, is the universe the kind of thing that everything in it has, in fact, derived its existence from a source? And all of this, in fact, goes all the way back to God. Now some of you might hear that and say, oh, you're going to talk about creationism. Not really. Because most science would say that, in fact, yes, the universe is a long chain of cause and effect, and this all goes back to what we call the singularity and the Big Bang, and so everything in the universe begins at one point and goes out from there. And Lewis wants to make the point that, in fact, everything in the universe derives its being from something. Now, a lot of times people say, well, I don't believe in God because I can't find God, I can't see him, I can't lay hold of him. That argument assumes that God is simply another thing in this accumulation of beings in the universe. Lewis would say, along with Christian tradition, that God is being itself. God is the beginning of all being, and God, in fact, sustains the universe and upholds it by his own will. That's one thing that is declared in the Belgic Confession. Now, if the universe, in fact, is like this, where all of us have our source in something, none of us can really take credit for our genetic material, none of us can really take credit for the sun and the sky, or the fact that food grows out of the ground, or the fact that animals give themselves involuntarily for our food. This implies obligation. This implies a debt. Lewis would say that at the heart of sin is the assumption that me stands at the center of the universe, and I am not made for anything, but I can live for me. Lewis would say that, in fact, we are made by God, and we are made for God, and we are made for each other, and we are made for the world. That implies obligation. That implies debt. You'll notice in Christianity and many other religions that most of the time we assume a debt to our parents. One of the 10 Commandments says, honor your father and mother. Well, what is behind that? Well, part of that is your parents gave you life. You owe them something. Just like you owe, in a sense, every animal that gives its life for your sustenance. You owe every plant that gives its life for your sustenance. You owe the source of the universe for all of the things that you enjoy and are sustained by. And in fact, if we do not too much thought, we will realize that we are incredibly dependent on all kinds of things in this universe. And again, Lewis would say that if in fact we live this way, that I don't imagine myself dependent on anyone, I don't imagine myself obliged to anyone, I don't imagine myself indebted to anyone, then in fact we imagine that it's perfectly okay to simply live for me. Now, Lewis would say that this is sin, and maybe in another video I'll talk about hell, but Lewis would say that hell is actually simply me brought to its logical conclusion, that all I care about is me, and finally, there is only me in existence. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about in a number of these videos is, in fact, worship. Because for many people, the idea of an obligation to worship, the idea of coming together to worship, the idea that we do this not for ourselves, but for our God and for others, is a strange one, because we have kind of lost a sense of this obligation to the world around us. It's the large me, it's the independent me that governs. And what happens when we worship is, I know for a lot of Americans it's a very strange thing. We all come into a room and we together say thank you for the sky, for the stars, for our parents, for the food, for the rain, for the ground, for the sunshine. We say thank you to the source of all of these things that we believe is God. And this is why worship is not only an obligation, it's a command, it's a duty, but it's also a joy that if you believe that, in fact, you are not your own, but you are at the end of a long line of connections that many of which have sacrificed dearly to give you who you are and what you have, then worship is an absolutely beautiful, reasonable, and appropriate response to this. And this is why, part of the reason why, we'll talk more reasons about it, this is why Christians worship. And when Christians worship, they remind each other that me is not at the center of the universe, that I am not an independent thing, something that actually we come to realize when the money runs out, or there's a drought, or a bug invades our body and we realize we're going to die, that I am not an independent thing, that I, in fact, have been the blessed recipient of a whole number of things in the universe, and that, in fact, I should worship and give thanks for what I have received, and I should also adopt an attitude and embrace the debt that, in fact, I shouldn't live to myself, but I have been made for God, and we have been made for each other, and we have been made for the world. And this actually is a very meaningful and a very joyful and a very optimistic idea. So if you like this video, if you have any questions, please leave a comment, drop me a note, send me an email, send me a tweet, one way or another. Bring me more questions. I'd love to follow this up with any questions that you might have. And thanks for listening.